this idea, this has always bothered me. The idea of a self-made man, when people talk about that, I think is just totally asinine. No one that accomplishes anything is self-made. I just think that we're supposed to be living in community. And when you don't have that, and when you're disconnected from it, I think there's some really damaging, results that happen.
Every week here on More Than Profit, we explore the stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and investors who have made a difference in the world while building successful businesses.
We sit down with each guest and dive into their personal journey, their struggles and triumphs, and the lessons they've learned along the way.
On this episode, we're talking with Brendon Maxwell, co-founder and chief impact officer at Utopian Coffee. He and a best friend started Utopian in 2006 as a way to bring craft-roasted coffee to individuals throughout the United States who are tired of choosing between quality coffee and making meaningful purchases. They dig in deep with coffee-producing partners across the globe to create products that both taste good and do good. That means fair pricing for raw materials, doing the long and complex work of sustainable development, and maintaining an unwavering focus on providing the best quality at the best price with the best service.
Brendon's love of adventure and travel are only matched by his ability to never meet a stranger. Everywhere he goes, he is able to foster deep relationships, and this is what makes Utopian a unique brand of craft coffee.
Well, Brian, we all have fond memories of coffee, or at least I think we do. Good coffee, good coffee, and you definitely know bad coffee. So for me, one of my worst memories of coffee, I was in the Army about 20 years ago.
This is a horrible story.
Stationed on the DMZ. And the one thing you never mess with for soldiers is coffee, especially when it's early in the morning. So we did this midnight rollout. It was up on the DMZ where it's stand to, 5 a.m. And the next thing to show up is supposed to be chow. And so that's, it's bitter cold, January, and you're just jonesing for some coffee. And DFAC, the dining facility, shows up. They unload everything, and you go to get your coffee, and they had mixed the orange juice with the coffee.
And you had some pissed off people.
Oh my gosh. We had a mutiny on our hands because, there's nothing you can do. It's not like they can go back around the corner and turn it back in and bring you back. No, it's done. You're off to your day of missions, and that's your coffee. So when you have those experiences, you come to appreciate coffee a lot.
It's funny because my coffee journey started probably 15 years ago. Like I didn't drink coffee till 15 years ago. The company I was with bought a coffee company that was really good coffee. And so I started drinking lattes and fell in love with really good coffee. And then I realized not all coffee's the same. So I'd go other places and I was like, oh, this is terrible. And my wife would get mad because I'd be like, I'm not drinking that. Like we have to find a better coffee, that stuff, because I started off on really good coffee. And then I was just hooked. Well,
even Laura this morning was talking about how you guys in San Diego, you go on your coffee crawl, and it takes like all morning to find a place for your coffee.
Yeah, I love good coffee. Now, what most of you don't know though, and our guest just found out because he brought me coffee because he's staying at our house right now, and we aren't drinking. So Bryce and we're not drinking caffeine. We're doing a diet. A diet that doesn't allow caffeine. And I thought it was going to be really the end of the world, and it hasn't been as bad as I thought. Because I realize now that caffeine and coffee are Satan's play, but
I still have to cheat every once in a while.
Oh no! Oh yeah! No, I love coffee. I love and our guest today makes some of my favorite coffee in the whole world.
Yeah. So our guest today is Brendon Maxwell. So talk to us about your story with coffee. Do you have a bad story with coffee?
I have lots of bad stories with coffee. Similar to you, I actually didn't drink coffee.
Wait, no, when you say you, me.
Sorry, similar to you, Brian McKay, the fourth upstanding Brian McKay. I didn't drink coffee until we started the company. I was young, but I didn't need it to function.
But you started a coffee company and you didn't drink coffee.
I did not drink coffee prior to that. Now, I was 23, 22 when we kind of started messing with the idea, but I didn't need it in college to function. So it was just, I was never drawn to it. And part of that was because I just didn't think the taste was that good. Had never had great coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I didn't need it to function, didn't think it was great. And so, my foray into coffee was really on the social, relational side. So my cousin and I started the company together. He was really the roaster. So he was the coffee guy. And in his college experience, he did need it to function. And so was drinking, subpar coffee through college, someone got him a bag of coffee, and it was much better than anything he'd had had. And he was one of those guys that would just research things to their absolute end. And so he gets into this coffee, figures out that it's specialty coffee, 100% Arabica, right? All that's like par for the course now, but back then, early 2000, that was a little more unique. And so gets in, figures out that it was a small batch roaster and why it's good, and decides that when he graduates the following year, he's going to go back to our hometown, the bustling metropolis of Fort Wayne, Indiana. And he goes to a micro roaster and says, hey, I don't care if you pay me, what you pay me, I just want to learn how to roast coffee. And so that was kind of his introduction into, really great coffee. And I was living, where was I at the time? I think I was in Northern California then, a couple years later after he started. And I had heard that the coffee was good. I still didn't drink coffee at that point, but had friends working at Google and Yahoo and some other startups that didn't fare as well. And I called him one day and said, hey, what would you think about a web-based coffee company? And, we can set up a Facebook account. So that was back when you still had to have a .edu address to be on Facebook. And so in the early days, we were spending $5 a day, advertising, and we didn't know where it was going. I mean, it was, mostly Ivy League schools is where we were kind of marketing at that point.
And you got subscriptions. People started buying.
Yeah. People were buying subscriptions, and it was a fun little intro. But I mean, we really didn't know what we were doing. I was 23, he was 24, and some may argue I still don't know what I'm doing, Brian. But
thank you for your confession.
But it was fun. It was a great journey. I mean, we started with $750. We had, like I said, very little idea what we were actually doing, but it was exciting. And so my background was more on the, like I said, the social philanthropic side. I had some sales and marketing background, but my interest in it was about the people, specifically the people in coffee origin, so the countries where coffee's grown. And yeah, I was a backpacker.
But why? I mean, you weren't familiar with coffee. You didn't even know about it. Was there a trip? What kind of gave you the passion to work with the growers specifically?
So in 2005, I had just finished school, finished a year early. I was originally studying biochemistry and Spanish with intent to go to med school. And then my brother moved overseas when I was in late high school, and I started traveling to visit him and just fell in love with this adventure of other places, other food, other culture, other language. And
which you still have today. I mean, it's your DNA.
Yeah, love it. If I had the choice, it's what I'd be doing all the time. I mean, I just returned 2 days ago from an international trip that was a blast, and so I'd be doing it all the time if I could. I now have to balance that with a slight level of responsibility between, family life and work life, but fortunately, I'm still very fortunate to get to travel a decent amount, through work. But going back, I was in 2005, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and met a couple Germans at a hostel, and they told me they were going to this really cool waterfall up in Nicaragua, and so asked me to join, and I went up there. And as we were hiking out, we passed by this coffee farm, and I looked over. I mean, I can still envision it now. I looked over and I saw two kids playing, one boy and one girl, and just had this moment, this realization that even though I didn't grow up with money, my parents were, very middle class, maybe even lower middle class when we were young, I would forever have more opportunity than these two kids, just as a result of where I was born and the circumstances that I had for opportunities. And so there was just kind of this moment where, and again, at this point, my cousin had been roasting coffee for a couple of years. This was a coffee farm that I was viewing, and I just feel like this idea was sort of planted at that point. Hey, what if we could use coffee to create opportunity for people who otherwise may not have it? And that was really the intro for me.
So clearly you love adventure. You've moved a lot. You've lived different places, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, this trip that kind of changed kind of your view on things. But you're from Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Yeah.
And you now live in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
That's right. How
did you come to kind of have that sense of adventure and that sense of purpose that's, beyond even Fort Wayne, Indiana? Like a lot of people, Midwest, they stay, they're content. You're not. So talk to us about that. Where does that drive come from?
But I do think that what's interesting is so we've known Brendon a long time, but Brendon, you are, and I said it to you this morning, I mean, one of the most caring, you care about humans, you care about people, just anybody, that you come across, you look and you see them, you really see people, which I think is rare, because I would have been on a trip, saw those two kids and thought, sucks to be them. And
well, it really is a gift. I mean, for you. So what nurtured that gift? I mean, obviously for you.
Well, thanks for saying that, guys. I think,
Well,
those are the...
Bryce didn't say it. I said it.
Okay,
But
so thank you for saying that, Brian, and Bryce for piggybacking on the idea that Brian so eloquently laid out. I think that my mom is a super caring person and also adventurous. And so I think, I have these people in my life who poured into me in different ways in different seasons. And I mean, she was a really significant influence in my life growing up. Just we had a really great relationship, and she just loved us really well. And even though, I mean, she got pregnant with my brother when she was 19, and so didn't necessarily have those years of adventure. But as we got older, I mean, she now will still go. And for the 10 years that my brother was living overseas, would go and visit him in Europe or a tiny little island in the Indian Ocean where he was living called Reunion. And so, I mean, that's always been part of her. And I think my brother got that as well. And I would say he was the next one that was just a massive contributor to my life, an encourager, and really charted the course. I mean, I feel like he, at least in our family, really blazed that trail. I mean, he was the one that at 18, I guess he graduated high school a semester early and moved to France after teaching himself how to speak French off records. And he's just a really gifted intellect, but a talented guy in general. And he's now taught himself to speak, 7 or 8 languages. I mean, he's just a really gifted guy, but moves to the south of France, becomes fluent, and then starts doing that kind of all over the world, moves to Mexico and, becomes fluent in Spanish. And so I just had the opportunity to visit him. I would save up money, and on my spring break or whatever the time period was, would just maximize that. So I flew to London when he was living there for a year, and we just had these incredible adventures, right? And he's one of those guys that I've never seen someone make a dollar go further. And so I was really kind of taught how to travel. And I think that's one of the things I remember when I was young, people would say, oh, I wish I could do that. And in my mind, I was like, oh, you can, it's easy, just go and do it. And then I started realizing later, it's actually not that easy. The thing that I was fortunate to have was a guide, right? Like I had this guy who blazed the trail. And so I didn't feel like I had to do as much work. And, and it started out easy. Like I said, first time was in London. So it's like, okay, longer flight, but same language, more or less. And, getting that easy introduction. And then it was France. And so still a Western culture, but, different language. And so at this point, my brother was really encouraging. I mean, I remember him writing a letter to me and giving it to me before he knew that I was going to Australia and New Zealand. And that was my first big trip by myself. And yeah, it was just this encouragement from a guy who had taught me how to travel and explore. And so I was doing an adventure tour on the South Island of New Zealand, and I was paragliding in the Remarkables mountain range. I mean, this is one of the, again...
So by yourself?
By myself, yeah. Well, there was a guy on my back who was actually flying it, fortunately. But yes, I was on the trip by myself, and probably wouldn't be here to tell that story if he wasn't with me. But, flying around, several hundred feet up in the air. And I mean, the way that the light is hitting this mountain range, purples and pinks and oranges. I mean, it was just the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. And while I'm up there was this moment of realization. It was just like, I have to figure out a way for this to continue. And so, I think these seeds were planted in different ways. And, there was the coffee opportunity, and really as those were codified, trying to figure out how I can create this vision and make it work in a way that's sustainable.
So why does that matter? Okay, so we're going to have some listeners that maybe not have traveled outside their hometown or state or whatever. But why is that important? Like, you've traveled a lot in a lot of different places. Why would we encourage people to get out there and kind of see the world a little bit more?
I think for so many reasons, but it has just expanded my perspective on so many things. It's given me empathy for people that I wouldn't have had empathy for otherwise. But the thing that I'm always encouraged and challenged by is this idea that at the core, I think we all want the same things. And it's easy to kind of vilify a person across the line, whatever that line may be. It may be a state line, a country line, a language line, a culture line. And, I've been fortunate to travel through, I think I'm somewhere around 45, 50 countries on 6 different continents. And every time I'm in a place, I'm just humbled by the idea that we're the same. We want the same things at the core. We want to be, respected, and we want to have love. We want to be in relationship with people, and we want to find a purpose. And everywhere I go, those tend to be themes that I see, throughout humanity. And so it's just been a beautiful gift for me. I feel so fortunate, so rich in that way.
Well, and the cool thing is we were talking yesterday, and I'd love for you to share with our listeners just the recent experience you had with your son. Because I think that's also important.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's been a gift. So, I've been traveling internationally now for 24 years, something like that. And, had always had this vision. And then, I got married about 9 years ago, 9 years in September. And, my oldest is 6.5. And so in December, we had the opportunity to go to Nicaragua together. And it was
just the two of you, your
just
son.
the two of us. Yeah. Just the two of us. And it was on a coffee.
Keep in mind, he's 6.
Yeah, 6 years old. And on that trip, he went from 6 to 12. There was a maturity about him in ways. And I think part of that is just a different circumstance, right? I mean, my wife is an incredible mom and they have a great relationship, but being away from, his mom and his little brother, he was just a different human and he was activated in ways that I've never seen before. And so I think even as you asked that question, previously, I think this is kind of the core of it, right? What's more innocent and malleable than a 6-year-old? And so you see it happening. I got to see it in front of my own eyes where this 6-year-old turns into, from like a young boy to an older boy right in front of my eyes because he's activated with these experiences. I mean, quite honestly, I got shamed into trying some foods that I wasn't planning on otherwise. I mean, he's all in, right? So he's taking it. It's so gratifying to see he's got this, little adventure bug himself. And we just had a blast together. There were so many bonding moments and it was incredible.
But you just talked about your brother, like being a guide for you. And I think we lose that sometimes as parents, like as a parent, we're to guide our children. Right. And that's kind of what you're doing in a safe way. He's with you. He's alongside you. You're guiding him to these opportunities for adventure and exposing him to cultures and, introducing him to that line. So he's like, oh, that person over there is not as different as I might have thought they were. Yeah. Or heard about.
That's the goal. And, part of it is just selfish. I mean, I just want an adventure and, want him to come with me. And I think on that trip, it turned, from, me being really sacrificial, thinking, all right, I'm going to take one for the team and, bring along my son and pour into the next generation. And then we just became traveling buddies. I mean, it was just amazing. He was doing things. I tore my Achilles a couple months before that trip and had surgery. And so I was still in a boot and the airline wouldn't let me on with a boot because I didn't have a doctor's note, didn't know I needed one. And so I just remember this one moment where, there's a bunch of people behind me trying to get on the plane and we're kind of scrambling. And he's like, don't worry, Dad, I'll carry this. And he's just jumping in and being really proactive and responsible in ways that I just hadn't seen before. So it was super fun. And I hope that gift, that seed that's planted, just like it was implanted in me, is really watered and flourishes. And he's able to, find something in his life, whether it's similar industry or totally different, that he can really pour into and love people well through.
And I think some of it for me is, so my father-in-law passed away 4 years ago, but he was a constant learner and travel was part of that. But that's what, I think what you're modeling for your kids and what was modeled for you is you're curious, like you're always curious. And I'm like, my father-in-law passed away at 82, but he still had a bucket list of countries that he wanted to take the grandkids to, and then also places he wanted to fish and hunt. And I'm like, he was always a learner. And I go, that to me is, with the listeners, I'm like, I think what's modeled here is we have an opportunity to make our kids curious. So, and again, it might not be, because some people listening going, I'm never going to do those trips. But I watch Bryce will take 6 weeks, put his kids in a trailer and they'll go on an adventure. And again, I just think we have to be thinking of ways.
Or just take them on a work trip. I mean, it can be like, I've got a one night, and I think oftentimes people think kids are in the way, and
which sometimes they are.
Sometimes they are, but I think when they're the dynamic, you get them away from their siblings, you put them in a situation where they are maturing and they feel like they're among the adults, they change. I've brought my girls to business meetings in New York and San Francisco, all over the place, and people love it, and my kids love it, and they haven't been disruptive, and it's been a true joy.
I think that's good. So Brendon, tell us, so what is it you do? I mean, obviously you're traveling, but what's your
day job?
Yeah.
Yeah, so my day job, I am co-founder and chief impact officer at Utopian Coffee. So my cousin Patrick and I started Utopian Coffee officially in 2006. Again, pretty meager startup budget, $750. Popped up one of the worst websites you've ever seen in your life. Wish I had some screenshots that I could show you right now, but it was pretty terrible. Just take my word for it. And started selling online, and then kind of progressed for the first 2.5 years. It was a side project. We ended up getting an economic development loan from the city of Fort Wayne for about $20,000, and purchased a roaster with that, a coffee roaster, and moved it back from Oklahoma City and put it in a warehouse. It was a windowless warehouse on the 4th floor of a building. I met a guy coming home from the Indianapolis airport one day, and he was just a great guy. Jim is his name, and Jim and his wife Cheryl have been very gracious through the years, and so he let us have that place, rent free. And so it was just a great place to start. The first summer, we were a scrappy operation. First winter we were there, the floor wasn't temperature controlled, so Patrick and I built walls, stuffed it with whatever material we could find. Definitely not meeting code, and then plugged in a couple space heaters. Then a few months later, when it got hot, too sweltering, especially with the roaster going in there, we cut a couple holes in the walls, went to a garage sale and got 2 AC units, threw them in the walls. And so it was just, it was so fun though. Those were the times, and I love the adventure of that stuff, and it was a really fun adventure. But yeah, now what I get to do is, my favorite part of, the work is taking a backpack and going overseas to connect with farmers and figure out how to come alongside them, really try to understand what it is, their goals, as I talked about before. We have similar things that we want as humans, but what are their goals, and how can we create a sustainable supply chain that honors the hard work that these farmers are doing? And so that's primarily what I do.
So what are some examples? So when you say that, what does that look like? You travel to Nicaragua or Mexico, or what are you doing with the farmers? How are you helping them?
It manifests differently in different places, right? And so that's one of the things why I say we want to come alongside them and understand. I have surprising conversations that I could have never guessed if you gave me 100 opportunities to try to guess what they needed, right? So years ago, I was in Rwanda, and we were having this conversation and, about that. Hey, what do you need? And the answer to my surprise was, we need sewing machines. And I was very confused by, thinking, maybe that's a quicker way to, sew the burlap bags that they come in, because they have a big needle. Like, no, not for that. They wanted sewing machines so that they could make clothing in the slower seasons when the harvest wasn't there. And that's part of how they were creating sustainability. And so we were working with this all-female owned co-op that had come together post-genocide. The previously warring ethnicities, the Hutu and the Tutsi, came together and formed this really, beautiful picture of what it means to have a restoration and redemption. And so we get to be alongside them in that. But there are those kinds of things that said, all right, let's, figure out how to help support that. In Colombia, we've been fortunate to be a part of a project that's converting cocaine farms to coffee. And that's just been, probably the epitome of what it is that we want to do and what I've been able to do. We have a short little mini documentary that we filmed down there, and it was the most gratifying work I've ever done. I've never had adrenaline pour through me for that long of a time while we were digging out these coca trees and piling them up to later. And if you watch the little mini doc, we end up burning this pile of coca. The farmer that we're with, Norberto, we got to have this beautiful conversation with him, and he just said, look, in your country, and he was holding some cocaine, and he said, hey, in your country, this costs tens of thousands of dollars, right? But in my country, it costs lives, it costs communities, and I don't want to be a part of it anymore. And, throws the cocaine in with the coca, and, it all burns. And it was just this beautiful picture.
And did he get in trouble for burning it?
No, it's a longer story. But you don't just get to sneak into Coke Labs there. But in order to make it a really authentic process, and for us to learn, honestly, I wanted to see it. I guess this is part of that, risk and the adventure that I like. But I wanted to see the whole process. And so we got to go into a Coke Lab and see the whole thing, being done. And so anyway, that's what we took over there and threw into the fire.
In October of 2015, Jonathan Kumar stood on a street corner in downtown Seattle. He watched a man beg for 20 minutes as not a single car opened a window for him. The man, Edward, stood there painfully seeking diabetes medication for his feet after recently ending up on the street. As person after person passed the man by, Jonathan eventually approached him and had a conversation with him. It was then that Jonathan realized this man was experiencing not just financial poverty, but a profound sense of relational poverty. Many urban and citygoers continually confront homelessness, but are caught without time, cash, or wherewithal on if cash will even help at all. These and other barriers lead to the easiest response: do nothing. And so individuals without a home are told hundreds of times an hour that they do not exist. So Jonathan built Samaritan, a support platform that empowers people without a home to move forward. Individuals gain the social and financial support needed to rebuild hope and reach housing goals. So become a Samaritan today. Be a part of encouraging your unhoused neighbors and funding strategic needs to help them reach life-changing outcomes. To learn more and to become a Samaritan, visit samaritan.city. And also check out episode 46 of this podcast to hear my interview with Jonathan about his journey and the amazing work they're doing at Samaritan. Now back to the episode. Well, so over the years, you've been able to do other things. I mean, you've done real estate and some other things as well. So you actually kind of stepped back. Like, you've always been involved in the coffee company, but several years ago you kind of step back. But a couple of years ago, you kind of had to step back in. Can you talk to us about that? Because I think, we were talking about it yesterday, just kind of even like a leadership crisis and what was the company becoming and culturally and that. And I think it's important, you're one of the co-founders. This is your baby alongside of your friend and partner. So what happened there?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of things. I mean, it was really in late 2020 and early 21. In fact, I drove out here to see Brian and his wife Laura, brought our family out for a couple of weeks just to spend time. I mean, to get out of the Midwest winter. It was February 21. So get out. What we didn't know is we would encounter the worst snowstorm driving through Texas that they'd ever had. It was when Austin lost all their power. I mean, it was nuts. It was crazy. But anyway, finally made it to the desert sun.
And you did a transfer, like Carly transferred during a snowstorm.
During a snowstorm, it would have been more dangerous to pull over. There was so much snow, we would have been stuck. And Texas just doesn't have the infrastructure, so none of the exit ramps were plowed. And the semis were just coming through. I mean, they were still driving 60, 70 miles an hour in this unbelievable snowstorm. And Carly did an amazing job, but it got to the point where it was like, hey, I should probably take over the drive here. And so we found a gap, got her to slow down to about 20, and then I jumped behind her. She switched over, and I started driving. It was a little perilous, but we made it work. And the boys are sitting in the back, just none the wiser. I mean, they were great the whole time. They did amazing. Took 22 hours to drive, and no screens or anything. I mean, they rocked it the whole time, reading books and taking naps. It was great. But
those poor kids.
Oh, well, yeah.
So you got down here for what purpose?
So got here just, I think, for some clarity. I was seeking a different environment to try to process some things. And Brian, you and I talked about this. I think I even left here saying, hey, I don't know that this is what I'm supposed to be doing right now, is leading the coffee company. I think it was leadership fatigue. There was, tough stuff going on in 2020. A big part of it in retrospect was, I had to cancel 7 flights to Colombia and some other places. And that's really the work that gives me purpose and meaning. And you can ask my wife, Carly, but that was a challenging season for me to be locked down. I'm also an extrovert. And so to not have some of those interactions and relationships that are really life-giving to me was hard. The other part of the story is that you referenced my co-founder, who's my cousin and best friend. In 2019, he died in a really tragic way. And I think that, again, looking back on it, was really difficult. And the idea of this is the guy who introduced me to coffee and the work that I'm doing, and he's not here anymore. And he wasn't with the company at that point. He had an opportunity to move to Michigan, where his wife is from originally, so he wasn't there, but he was still a significant part of that story. And we were in constant communication, and it was heartbreaking on many levels. And I think the combination of all those things got me to a place where I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing and how I was going to create value. And so so, yeah, I think I stepped back a little bit. At the same time, we also had a really competent guy come into the company who was able to handle things day to day. Scott is his name, and Scott is an amazing guy. I've known him since he was 5 years old. I grew up with his family, and he's just incredibly gifted. He is the only guy, I told him this, we had a review 2 weeks ago. He is one of those rare characters that exists in a quadrant of super high IQ and EQ. And I know a lot of guys that can, bat well in one of those categories, but to have both of them where they're just crushing it is rare. And so I'm super grateful for him. He's been a tremendous asset to me personally and to the company. And he really gave me some of that freedom and that space that I needed, I think, at that time to pull back and do an analysis of what it is that, we're called to. And I think the plan was to step away a little bit more. And then as time progressed, we finished some of the, one of the real estate projects that we were working on and got it up to sustainability. And then that travel came back, right? Things opened back up and I got to do the infrastructure within the company was such that I got to start going back on the road, start connecting with farmers again, and then bringing, the family into it a little bit as well. And so now I just feel like I'm in a place where it was like, no, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. We still have some of those real estate opportunities and that's great, but this is the work that I love.
Well, and thanks for sharing because, I know that's a really tough story. I mean, but it's helpful, I think, for people to hear. Like, COVID was rough, especially for folks that are extroverts and used to travel and meeting with people. And so that isolation coupled with the loss of your best friend and, just really, where's the joy in what I'm doing? And how do I find that again? Why am I doing this? I did this because I love my best friend. I love meeting people. I can't meet people and my best friend's gone. What does this look like? So that's tough. And it's really cool because what I want to kind of go to a little bit is, I think one of the things you came and saw Brian, but you also, like, what I've always been impressed by you about is you have an understanding of the value of friendship and community that I think is unique. Where does that come from for you? And what would you say to people, like the value of friendship to you, the value of community? What is that? And how has that helped you in very, specific ways?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know the full origin behind that, but what I do know is that I have just been radically blessed with incredible friends and community throughout the years. I just feel like I've always been provided. I think God has just put people in my path in a way that I've been encouraged and challenged and sustained in all of these seasons. And I mean, that's really part of how I've been able to move around, I think, with ease, is I always find someone that ends up being meaningful. But that community is so critical. I mean, in that time, so specifically that season where my cousin Patrick died, I had so many people come around me. I mean, my wife obviously was the most significant person in that journey, but people reaching out and showing up in ways that were just so profound and really necessary when I was in a really tough spot emotionally.
But I also feel like, because I remember getting a call from you when all that went down, and you were like wanted help, and I just remember I didn't even know how to help you other than sit on the phone, cry with you, pray with you, listen, and and that stuff, and then try to follow up with caring phone calls. But I go, you also. Like, I don't feel like you suffered in silence. Like, I felt like you sought people out and asked for help, just going, help me process this. And I just remember not even knowing how to respond, just feeling that burden of going, I wanted to be helpful, but not even knowing how, just going, dude, I'm just so sorry. And
I think that's the key. And one of the things that I try to remember now when people are going through hard things is just showing up, right? And I think even that theme is one of the things that I would say is kind of came to me. Someone asked me if I would write a book, and I've just had some fun adventures through the years. And
wait, someone asked you, or you asked yourself in the mirror?
Well, I asked myself, and I was very humbled at the opportunity. No, but a guy was saying, hey, you should write a book. And I've had, several people say that through the years, and I'm just thinking, I don't know what I would write about. And after this guy a couple years ago asked, I was like, what would I write about? And I started making a list of just these anecdotes. Like in my mind, it's just these short stories of the opportunities that, God's placed before me. And I've just tried to steward well and what I've learned from those different things. But one of those, so in, kind of the working title of this idea is I distill it, and why I think I've had some of these is show up and say yes, right? So that idea, show up, say yes. And what does that mean? What does that look like? But I think even in those moments, Brian, as you're talking about, and you did that for me, you were, so helpful in that season just because you were willing to pick up the phone and to reach out, and because you showed up, and you're amazing at that. That's why you have the deep relationships that you do, is because you show up and you say yes. You're just willing to be present. And I think that's what people need in those seasons, right? They just need someone to be present with them that they know cares. So I've had the great honor to be able to do that with other people since that, tragedy in 2019. And so anyway, community, I think, is just critical. And really for me, it was also profound with my wife and I, when we first got married. We're living in Southern California. I'd lived there before and she hadn't. We had one car. She was working remotely for a company back in Indiana where we left. And, if you asked us to reflect on that time, I'll tell you the story about how amazing it was, right? And she tells a slightly different story.
Always trust Carly is all I know.
That's right. But it was embarrassing because when I heard her retell this story, part of this is probably me as an optimist, but I just didn't know how disconnected she was, right? And part of that was new marriage. It was our first year. We were working through communication stuff and figuring out how to do that well, but she didn't have community out there. So we ended up getting pregnant and moving back to Fort Wayne and started doing life with people in the same season of life. Other women who were pregnant, had young kids. She has just been so richly blessed by the women in our community. And so again, I feel like I've always been fortunate to have those relationships kind of anywhere I've been, but to see her in that and really thriving as a result of that community, in my mind, just kind of makes that really clear. Because look, it's hard. I don't think we were called to live in isolation. And sometimes, especially in the American culture, we're taught to do it ourselves, and you pull yourself up by the bootstrings. And, this has always bothered me. The idea of a self-made man, when people talk about that, I think is just totally asinine. No one that accomplishes anything is self-made. So, I just think that we're supposed to be living in community. And when you don't have that, and when you're disconnected from it, I think there's some really damaging, results that happen.
Well, seeing you this week, it's been quite refreshing, partly because I think I see a new energy. You've gone through this season of COVID and isolation and questioning leadership and kind of exhaustion. But now, looking to the future, you kind of a renewed kind of passion for some of this work.
And with that, though, because I was going to say, because Oaxaca, you took, how many months did you take in Mexico?
Well, they just did a couple of weeks.
So we just went down for, a little more than a week in February. Okay. But that was a bit of a scouting trip to see if it was, the right place. So my wife, Carly, and our two boys came down with me as well. And the idea was, hey, let's go have an experience and make sure that we can do this, because the plan is to go for 3 months next year.
Yeah, because that seems like that's revived you a little bit of going. And Carly seems very excited about it, too. I think the fact that both you're on the same page. And
you're doing it together with your family. So talk to us about Oaxaca. Talk to us about where Utopian is going and kind of some of the renewed passion that you have for the future.
I've had this 15-year plus thesis about what we're doing through Utopian Coffee and how it's making lives better. And I have, plenty of anecdotal stories. I can tell you about the conversation that I had with Pablo on the porch in a small town in Colombia. And he's one of the guys who was previously in the world of growing coca and had transitioned to coffee. In fact, his brother was the first one to convert and sadly was shot in the head and killed because of it. And so this is a guy who has seen it, right, and been through it and still has so much joy. He typically, has a smile on his face all the time. And so I really deeply care for Pablo, and we're having this conversation and on the porch. And at one point we're talking about the next year's harvest, just kind of, the nuts and bolts, some logistics of it. And we start talking about price, and he gets a little more serious, and I can see his eyes welling up with tears. And I say, Pablo, what's going on? And he said, this is the most we've ever been paid for anything in our lives. And it's just those moments that really codify this vision of, what I think we're supposed to be doing. And so I can give you these anecdotal stories, but when I pop into a place for a week or two, it's sometimes hard to know what's the long tail effect of that, right? And I want to always try to be very careful to not have any imperialism in what we're doing. I mean, we really want to have used the phrase, we want to go with bigger ears than mouths, right? Like really listen to what it is that people want and what's going to make their lives better. And so in Oaxaca, Mexico is a place we've been sourcing coffee for 3 years. There's some really meaningful projects going on down there, a lot of female producers, and we've been involved with, a couple of projects, but it was a place that kind of spoke to me. It was had an interesting culture, and so we said, hey, what would this look like? And I think there were several things coming together at the same time. My wife got interested in it from a food and culture perspective, and so we said, hey, what would it look like to go down there for 3 months and really be closer to the farmers, get to spend more time with them, build a deeper, lasting relationship, and make sure that what we're doing is actually moving the needle. And it's hard. I mean, anyone who's been in development work knows that it's hard. And I think the more open-handed we can be and the more honest and vulnerable we can be about this idea of what we're doing, the more effective it can be. I can, again, tell you some meaningful stories, but I also really have no idea. In transparency and vulnerability, I don't know. I think that what we're doing is really good and meaningful, and we know because we've heard from farmers that that's the case, but I just want to really prove out this thesis in a more substantive way and see what we can do and make sure that it is meaningful for the people who need it most.
So if people want to buy your coffee, where do they go to buy your coffee?
Utopiancoffee.com is where we can sell. We're doing a rebrand right now, so launching new bags, and really part of that is better telling the story. I think that, the funny thing I said, people have often said like, oh man, you guys have such an amazing story. How do I know? I told someone, this is the work I would be doing whether we were selling coffee, whether I sold an extra bag or an extra, 10,000 bags. This is what I'd be doing. So it's hard for me sometimes to promote it because I'm just a backpacker,
This is our commitment from More Than Profit is we want all of our listeners, if you've wasted all this time listening to this whole story, go out and buy 1,000 bags of this coffee and then give them out at Christmas time. So that's our commitment. That's what we're asking our listeners to do.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
And then what, like, apart from your coffee, what is your all-time, like, what's your favorite coffee shop in the world?
Oh gosh, favorite coffee shop. Well, I mean, I'm a little biased. We do have one cafe as part of a development that we got involved with a couple of years ago.
It can't be yours.
Yeah, it can't be yours.
But I'm just saying, quick little plug, a shameless plug for Utopian Coffee and Kitchen, downtown Fort Wayne, Indiana. But it's tough. I've had so many great cafe in coffee experiences in general. The funny thing is, quick story, people will come back from a place, we use Costa Rica as an example, and they'll say, oh my gosh, I had the best cup of coffee I've ever had in my life. And I know that is like verifiably untrue. I don't want to crush someone's dreams, but they are exporting their best coffee. Maybe, and I think this speaks to something though, a really important idea, that maybe it's that you were with your new bride on a honeymoon overlooking the ocean and, didn't have any work responsibilities. Like maybe that's actually what made it the best cup of coffee. There's a scale, it's a 100-point scale, and you can have grades for coffee. But I think what's important is that it's so experiential and it's relational, and that's one of the things that I really, really love about coffee. And so one of the best coffee experiences I've ever had was in Ethiopia, where they're roasting the coffee right there, right over a flame. They grind it right in front, and they call it a coffee ceremony. There's incense burning. I mean, it is an art. It's an experience, and it's so rich. I mean, I've had better coffee than that for sure, but a better coffee experience I haven't had. And so things like that. Now, I will say my favorite coffee comes from Ethiopia. They're another place that it's actually illegal. You have to export the coffee above a certain grade. And so it's really interesting in that way. But yeah, a naturally processed Ethiopian is my favorite coffee.
What coffee did you bring to my house that I can't drink?
Naturally processed Ethiopian coffee. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you're welcome.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, man, thanks for your time. Thanks for listening to this episode of More Than Profit. As Brendon stated so beautifully, show up and say yes in life. If you'd like to learn more about Utopian Coffee, please check out utopiancoffee.com. To stay up to date with More Than Profit, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, drop us a review so others can find us as well. And don't forget to check out our new show's website at morethanprofit.fm, where we have more added content, past episodes, and we'll be posting some exciting new information about upcoming live events to connect. You can also learn more about what's ahead by following us on Twitter at listen_MTP. More Than Profit is a production of Access Ventures. Executive producers are Bryce Butler and Brian McKay. Production and operations by Crystal Esquivel. Production assistance provided by Resonate Recording. And our theme song today was No Man's Land by Slapstorm. I'm Bryce Butler, and you've been listening to More Than Profit.